The thing that complicates this over time is I don't remember some of this stuff because it's such.
It's very old. It got a long time ago.
Yeah, well, in the sense of it's like such not a part of my life anymore that I don't remember. I don't keep track of stuff.
Right.
Like if I was writing a book, I'd have to go research it all.
Yeah. So I guess just to set the stage is I'm a friend of Greg and Donna Patchell, and they've been supporters of the nonprofit architecture work I do, and they're longtime friends of my family, and I'm just more curious about Freemasonry as a conversation in America as a whole, and what it means to the average person when they hear about it. What are they supposed to think? What are they not supposed to think? And this is kind of to help clarify some things and just chat about it from an open, kind of honest perspective. So,
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name's Greg Patchell. I live in Colorado, and I'm originally from Pennsylvania. So I'll stop it right there. It's very much in between.
And so, what's some of the original story of how you may have gotten involved or your family?
Right. So, I come from a long line of Masons, at least as much as I can remember, at least through my grandfather. I'm sure it was back farther than that, but I lose track. My parents are deceased right now, so my memory is gone with my parents. My dad was very involved in his lodge in Pennsylvania, and was involved with a lot of friends of his who became to me like aunts, uncles and aunts in the family. So, in fact, my wife sometimes will, early on in our marriage, was like, "Wait, you only have X amount of aunts and uncles. Your parents only had this amount of siblings. Where did everybody else come from?" And so back there, everybody's like an aunt and uncle if they're close friends of your parents. So the guys who are involved in the Masonic lodge with my dad, they were like uncles to me, so they were very close. So it was never a question in my mind that I was going to grow up and be in the Masonic lodge, because was just really part of my life.
It was just that brotherhood.
Right. Just like being in the church. I mean, I became a believer at a young age. I was 7 when I gave my life to the Lord. So, so it just was like a natural extension. As far as when did I become involved with Masonry, there's an age limitation of when you can be involved in it, and it might be different. It's been a while now. I'd have to research it, but it might be difference between the basic degrees. So there's 3 degrees in Masonry. The 3 basic degrees, and you're really not a Mason until you've received the 3rd degree. And so there was a special dispensation that I received because I was going to go in the military, that I could get 2 of the degrees together. So from my recollection, it was I got the 1st degree, then there was a certain amount of time, and then I got the 2nd and 3rd degree in the same night. Normally, they're 3 different periods of time apart.
How much time is there typically between each of them?
I can't remember that.
Is there a standard amount?
There's like a standard amount, but that said, so Freemasonry is different in the United States than it is in probably many countries in the world, where like if you're in Holland or Germany, there's like a national lodge. There's like, and every local lodge is chartered basically from the national lodge. The difference in the United States is because of how our country was formed. The lodge in each state came from a different place, so and had its own jurisdiction.
So like from England, right, and then became something here.
Right.
And then
so Pennsylvania came from England, and so the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania is its own sovereign jurisdiction. The Grand Lodge of Colorado is its own sovereign jurisdiction. There's not a Grand Lodge in the United States.
There's not like a pope or a queen that's head over all the lodges.
And that's true worldwide anyhow, right? But even within the United States, there's not a Grand Lodge of the United States. And then even other countries have interesting things like that, like Trinidad and Tobago, for instance. Their charter comes from like Scotland or something like that. So
partially because of the colonial history.
Exactly, right, yeah. So there's an interesting aspect of that each Grand Lodge can have its own slightly different rules or whatever, and they can grant certain dispensation to do things within their jurisdiction that other Grand Lodges would or would not do, whatever. Like if you're in Montana or in Illinois or whatever, they've got their own jurisdictions. Another interesting thing while I'm on the subject of jurisdictions is that to be, Freemasonry, there's a longer history, but if you think of the colonial time period where there was slavery and all that, basically you could not be a slave and be a Freemason. And so in the United States, in America, there is a organization that's like an African American organization. It's called Prince Hall, and Prince Hall was a person. His name was Prince Hall, and so Prince Hall is like an African American Masonic organization. And there's, I don't know these days. You have to do more research, but how much they relate to the regular part of Freemasonry at this point, and how much they do stuff together. Or whatever, I'm not sure how they relate anymore, but they might be like a more national organization within Prince Hall Freemasons.
Gotcha. But so for your personal background, it was your father who was involved, and therefore, it was a natural progression to becoming one.
Right.
And did that? Did you ever have like for Christians, we sometimes have a place where we like question what our parents brought us into? Was there a place where you were questioning that, or were you just kind of naturally in it?
Yeah, or? when you go through the different initiation procedures, there's different oaths that you take and whatever. And when I was taking some of those, I was sort of questioning that, and then I thought, well, like if my dad took these oaths and my uncles took these oaths or whatever, my grandfather did, then I must just not understand
why it's there,
why it's written the way it is, or whatever. So I'd ask questions, and people would explain, well, that doesn't really mean what it does. It's not as literal as what it means, or whatever. And so I didn't have any problems with it until I, spent some time researching it more when I was in my I guess let's see, how old was I then? 30s, I guess.
After how many years between joining?
Yeah, so that was like, so I was in the military.
Between that.
Yeah, between that, and the only times I ever was doing anything, like when I was overseas, I didn't do anything with any lodges overseas. And then when I was back in Virginia, I actually became part of a Masonic organization, like I don't know what they would call this, sort of like a spin-off kind of organization. It's part of Masonry, but it's like its own little side thing. It was called National Sojourners, not to be confused with another kind of sojourners in Christian world. But National Sojourners was sort of like this colonial kind of organization. They wore like American Revolution uniforms and stuff. And so I helped out. I was involved in that due to connections through, I think it started in the military. I'm trying to think how some of those things start. But I was involved in that when I was single and living in the D.C. area.
Oh, wow.
It's been a while since I was involved in that, so I kind of forget.
And it's like a cousin to the lodge, kind of?
Yeah, it's part of it. It just is, they just have some of these side organizations. Like there are side organizations that are like a women's auxiliary kind of organization, which is, and then there's like young men's organization, young women's organization. That are Masonic related organizations. So, but I was never involved in those. I kind of grew up being involved in Indian Guides, YMCA Indian Guides, and kind of from that went into high school and all that. Never got involved in the Boy Scouts or DMLA is like a teenagers organization.
Yeah, Order of DMLA or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. My uncle, I think, also was a part of that. But so, at what point did you leave at some point, or?
Yeah, I had researched that back in that time frame. That was we're talking about the 90s at this point, mid 90s, and researched it, and then made the decision to leave Masonry at that time. And it was a little bit hard on my dad because of kind of where he was in Masonry, but he understood that my intentions were pure, and it didn't cause a rift between us because we had a great relationship and loved each other, and so that went well, and didn't cause a rift between myself and my uncles, who were my dad's best friends, and didn't cause any rift in the relationship with that. So.
Wow. And so, like, you could still hang out with those, like, people and not, and be on friendly terms with
Right.
all
Well,
those
they're
people,
all deceased.
even though.
They're all deceased.
Okay.
But if they were alive today, I'd definitely love them. I'd love them like uncles and
Yeah.
aunts, and they love me like a nephew. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Never any bad blood over that or
Right.
whatever, so.
Wow. So what is, I think for some of the people who don't know, I guess the basics, what is a Freemason? How would you describe it?
Right. So sorry, there's a hummingbird flying.
You're good.
So a Freemason is a in this case it's a man, it's a fraternal organization who would subscribe in the fatherhood of God. At its basics, it would probably be the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. Must believe in one God. So it could not be like you could not be a Buddhist or
A polytheist.
An atheist, an agnostic. You would have to believe in one God. So they would say, at least the time I was involved, that you could be a Christian, you could be Jewish, you could be Muslim, because those are basically
the main monotheistic beliefs.
Exactly right.
What if there's like someone who believes in like Mother Gaia or like something further out there that's like
I would
God
say,
as a singular entity? Would
Yeah, I
they
would
be able
say-
to join?
I would say not, but I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, the world has gotten crazier since the 90s.
Has it
so-
become a lot more flexible for whoever is interested in joining?
I don't know. Well, Freemasonry was always, well, not always, was generally a more secretive organization, and like who was a Mason, who was not a Mason, and then as I was saying to you earlier off camera, I think that a lot of fraternal organizations became really big after World War II. Guys came back from the war and were looking at ways to keep some fraternal identity connections, right? Very good. And so you saw a lot of lodges, grow or expand or whatever, and then of course people were moving out of cities in the suburbs or whatever, and so lodges would spring up where the population would go.
So out of the military, the Navy, and some of those organizations.
Which is where you'd see like also Foreign Legion and American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars and some of the military related fraternal organizations crop up. You've got the Elks and Oddfellows and whatever the other organizations.
Are the Lions also?
Well, the Lions are more like a local business kind of related thing. But I would say that probably came out of that too. I don't know the background of it. But I would think after World War II, again, with the suburbs expanding, whatever, I think a lot of those organizations...
They wanted to maintain some form of connection
right.
post World War II.
Right. So in around the... I want to say like the 80s, 90s, at least as far as Pennsylvania goes, and I think you could say that for Colorado, there's a lot more push to... As numbers were going down, people were dying, people were losing that desire to be involved in fraternal organizations because there just, wasn't the desire to just go out of college and join a fraternal organization or whatever. The Masons, at least in Pennsylvania, took on a big campaign. It was called to be one, know one was their something to that effect. And the idea was they like a bumper sticker campaign and whatever. So, or ask one to be one, ask one to be one. So basically, it was like, trying to encourage people to
get to know
what Masonry was and ask about it, because the basic construct up until that time was like, you didn't ask about Masonry. Basically, people asked you to be a Mason kind of thing. So
you just waited for an invitation.
Right, you waited for an invitation. Like so somebody would come to you and say, "Hey, you're about old enough, and you thought about becoming a Mason." And usually, a couple guys would come talk to you and invite you to come join the lodge and consider joining the lodge, and like you'd fill out an application kind of thing, and then they would kind of go from there. So they became just more open about the lodge and because if the thing was like you couldn't ask somebody about it to join, it's not like you would necessarily go to your local Masonic lodge and just knock on the door and say, hey, I want to join, kind of thing.
That's not how it works.
That's not really how it works. So it was basically like somebody would have to ask you, so if your membership's declining, how do you get around that? Well, you kind of put out the campaign like, well, ask somebody about it, and then they'll talk to you about it, kind of thing.
Okay.
So
Okay,
it
gotcha.
became
So
like that.
today, how would someone try to join if they were to try to join?
That
today?
is a very good question because I haven't been in it for a while. So I don't
Okay.
know if it, like Colorado, Illinois, whatever. I don't know.
You just
what
go to
the-
like a website and
Yeah, I don't know what. Right, because it's a different world, right? So this is when I was involved here. This is like the beginnings of the internet.
send them a link
So-
on Instagram. You could just say, "Hey, can I join?"
Yeah, I'm sure that stuff's out there, and I'm
Huh.
sure then they would maybe connect people with you or something and talk to you or something
Huh.
like that. But I don't have any details on that.
Interesting.
My information is dated. So.
Dated from the 80s through 90s, kind of
Right. Right.
something like that.
Yeah. So mid 90s.
So that being said, why does it feel, at least in the U.S.,
Right.
I drive all across
Yeah.
the U.S. and I see that
Masonic
there's lots
lodges
of these
everywhere.
lodges and groups. Why do you think there's such a draw? Why are so many people part of these organizations today, as opposed to like the post-military?
Right.
stuff?
Right. So I would say, God made us for a desire for fellowship, and God made mankind for relationship. And we were just talking about this in our church not too long ago, that the one thing that God said was not good was what? After creation, you remember what that was? It's not good that
to be alone and
Right.
to not be in relationship.
Right. So it's not good that man would be alone. God created mankind to be in relationship,
Mm.
right? So I think, what you see is people long for relationship. People long for connection. People want to be known, right?
Mm.
And so I think if you're in the church, that's one thing, or if you go to synagogue, that's one thing. But beyond that, beyond stuff that God set up, basically, if people don't have that,
Then they need to find
then
some
they're
kind
looking
of
for that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I used to always say, and this would be back into even the 80s and 90s, I would talk about this before I was even looking at leaving Masonry, but I would say that Freemasonry was kind of like, this is a very general comparison, it was like people being in a car club, right? So like
Right.
people have a certain kind of car, and they want to be like in the
We all
anti-car
have a
club or something.
Mustang.
Well, we all have a Mustang, right?
And
So it's like, and so you do stuff with the people who do that. Or you ride motorcycles, right? So you're in a motorcycle club and you get together every so often, and then you organize, and how do you do stuff? So everything's set up so you can
do that.
do different things, right? So so I think that's in my mind, that's part of it too, is that you've got this situation where you've got people who want to be involved in something, and Masonry does a lot of good things. I mean, there's a friend of ours, dad, just died recently in his 90s, and he was raised in a Masonic orphanage in Illinois, and they took care of him when his dad had died and all this. His mom couldn't take care of him, so there's orphanages, there's like hospitals, there's other benevolent kind of
Wow.
things
Out
that
of
they
this
do.
bigger fraternity.
Out of this bigger fraternity, right? So it reaches a need in people to connect with each other and to step out beyond themselves to do positive things, right? So it's not like there are gangs like inner city gangs and whatever, or MS-13 or whatever,
Right.
pushing drugs or whatever. I mean, there's always positive things that the organization's doing. So I think you still see that across the United States because of that reason. Now, these days are there declines in lodges based on where people are living or moving to or from or whatever. I can't speak to that part.
Okay. Yeah. What alongside of what we were talking about earlier with the monotheism, are there certain things? What are some of the certain factors that someone needs to believe in to be able to for my application to be accepted?
Right.
Like, okay, so I
Well, I
believe in
think-
one God,
right.
but it's a particular type of God.
Right.
And
And I think that pretty much checks the block.
okay.
I mean, if somebody asked you and you said, well, you don't really know if God exists or not, then they would kind of like, no, I think he's not ready to be a part of our organization. Or if you said, I'm an atheist, I don't believe there's a God, I believe the universe is impersonal, blah, 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 and I would say that they would say, no, you don't fit in the organization.
I'm a Christian, is Christianity compatible with Freemasonry?
So from Freemasonry standpoint, Christianity and Judaism and Islam are all very compatible with Masonry. What you have to decide for yourself is as a Christian, is Freemasonry compatible with Christianity? So the reverse side of it, right? So and I would say at the lower levels it may seem that way, but the higher up you get, I mean, there's basically like 33 degrees in Masonry, and there's two basic branches of it aside from the Prince Hall part that I talked about in general. But there's York Rite and the Scottish Rite, and so there's two. There was like a split, and they had different directions. So you can go up to a certain level one, you go up to a certain level, same number of degrees in the other. They call them different things or whatever, and they have different buildings at a certain point, temples or whatever. So does that answer the question?
So can I still believe in the gospel as a core fundamental belief for my life and pursue the values that Freemasonry upholds?
So I think you can. I think the problem I would say is that it can have a tendency to water down your Christianity, depending how the lodge sees things. Because
is that why you left, or?
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons. I think, from my perspective, you have to decide in your life, and this is a big, broader perspective. In addition to Freemasonry, you have to decide in your life what you're going to spend your time on. Everybody's given the same amount of hours in a day. Everybody's given the same amount of days in a week, months in a year, etc., etc. So you have to decide what you're going to spend your time on and what God's calling you to do in your life, and whether you're going to have your time count for God or whether you're spending time doing other things. So again, I would use the car club example. So I've got a Mustang. We'll use the word Mustang. Mustang car is famous. So I've got a Mustang. And I like Mustangs, and I do a car club. And every weekend I, go on a big drive somewhere and do the car club. And I clean my car and I work on my car. I get parts for my car and I soup it up and whatever. And
spend a lot of time and attention.
Yeah, I go to shows and whatever. And you might say, okay, well, I'm single. That's not a big deal. But what if I'm married? What if I'm married and I have a kid? What if I'm married and I have a couple kids?
It's taking up more time.
Right. I'm still doing that same thing, right? So you have to say, what am I spending my time on? And whether it's a good thing or not, is it God's best for me or not? So am I spending time in an area that God's really called me to spend time on? And then the third thing you always have to look at is like, okay, well, in the thing I'm a part of, can I live as a Christian and do what God's called us to do, which is, at fulfilling the Great Commission. So making disciples, talking to people about Him. So if I'm an organization that I can't talk to other people about God, whether that's a car club or whether that's Masonic. Freemasonry or whether that's something else, that then becomes problematic, right? So
because you can't, in a Masonic lodge, could you talk to other people about
and
Jesus?
That's what I can't recall. I just think at a certain point, what happens in the Masonic lodge, one of the things is that it can sort of substitute, not for going to church, but it sort of can become like almost like its own kind of religion, and not that it is its own religion, but it can substitute the time of that, right? So like if you were in a church and let's say you were going to get involved in your church, it's like you only have so many hours to get involved in your church and do stuff. So if you're doing Masonic stuff, then that's going to take away the time that you could be doing stuff in your church. So then you're kind of saying to yourself, okay, well, am I spending time with the Masons doing their things, or am I spending time with my church doing their things? And to what degree is that then, compatible with my life? Where do I want to spend that time?
Right.
I guess that's probably good enough answer for that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Off of that, so according to Freemasonry, there is a higher power.
Right.
Is it like what? How would you describe that higher power? Is it the God of the Christians? Is it Allah? Is it the God of the Jews?
Right. So they would say Masons would refer to God as the supreme architect of the universe. So, from my perspective, sort of like a very impersonal God, not a mush God. Like sometimes in Christian circles we'll refer to mush God. The mush God is like, have you ever heard that term?
No.
Okay. So that's probably because you grew up overseas. But the mush God is kind of like you go to a ceremony, and not in like a Christian school or whatever, but you go to ceremony. Well, there's less and less of these that happen anymore, right? But let's say you go to a high school graduation ceremony and they allow people to pray.
But it's to whatever God that they.
Well, it's not necessarily to whatever God that they believe in, but it's just like to God, right? Like you would never, like somebody would say, oh, don't ever pray in Jesus' name, right? Don't ever just say to God, right?
Right.
And so like we sometimes refer to that as the mush God. So
gotcha.
the mush God is like just mush, right? It's like
the big buffet of whatever.
Right.
I'm gonna take on whatever pose I had at the end there. Oh, okay. But as far as like specifically Freemasonry, there's a lot of like opinions and beliefs out there. But what, for someone who doesn't know anything about it, what would you tell that person to research if they're interested, or consider thinking about?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I would research. I would look online. I mean, and check out whatever books are out there. I mean, back in the 80s and 90s when I was looking into this, there were quite a lot of books at the time, and I'm sure they're either out there, they've been updated to some degree or whatever, and probably a lot of stuff online.
Like this stuff?
Yeah, these are just some of the books I had back in the day, and I don't know how many publications I've had since then. But I would look into that and just dig a little bit further and just see. I mean, the trick about Masonry is it's got a lot of levels, and so you could be involved in the first 3 degrees of Masonry, which is called Blue Lodge, and not really ever be involved in the other stuff. But the other stuff is still up above there. And so the question is, what does that believe, even if you're not part of that? And so, because if you're part of that larger organization, what is the larger organization?
Is there a way to find out what the larger beliefs are at the end of it without being a part of it?
I would say there's not. I would say, like, you could ask the question, but probably most people in the Blue Lodge, the basic 3 degrees, they're not even going to know that because most of them are not even involved in that. And it's just not a part of their conversations or whatever. All their stuff is done at this one particular
Because
level.
for me, that's like the most important thing is like, okay, if I become an architect, what do I end up doing with this? I become I start building buildings and then do this with it and whatnot. And so it's like, I think that's an interesting thing that I've always wrestled with Freemasonry is, okay, it's secretive, but if someone gets involved with it, at what point do they find out what they're getting involved
and they
with?
don't, from my perspective, they don't really find out anything about that level until they're at that level.
Like the 32nd or 33rd.
Right. So, well, any of the levels, right? So, like, you don't find out what's in the first level, first degree, until you're in the first degree. You don't find out what's in the second degree until you're in the second degree. So there's never a way that you find out what the next one is before you get involved in the next thing. So, because it's just not, it doesn't function like that. And so, so really, you'd have to use outside resources outside the Masonic organization, outside Freemasonry, to figure out what is up at those levels. And I think we talked, if it's in earlier, I don't know, but there's 2 basic branches of Freemasonry other than the Prince Hall. There's York Rite and Scottish Rite. And so, depending who you read, the Scottish Rite will be the one that was kind of like more offline, so to speak, or off kilter from Christianity.
Pun intended.
But but so, yeah, very good kilter. But you'd have to, I think, just do a lot of research and figure out, what they believe in advance, because you really wouldn't know that being involved.
Cool. Well, on that note, I think it's really cool to empower people to ask more about organizations and groups before joining. And I guess it's tricky with the Masonic Lodge that you kind of have to join and then you find out. But still, do your research. And thanks so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
God bless you.
You too.
And we're curious to find out what your thoughts are in the comments. And we'll keep having more conversations. All right, peace out.